Our society has this view that everyone can become Elon Musk and be like brilliant in engineering, brilliant in science, brilliant at company building, but he's one out of 8 billion people. If you're a scientist, you've been incentivized to get as many scientific publications as possible in the right journals. Whereas if you're a company builder, you have to deliver results every week. And that's a very big mental difference. The thing that really matters to us is that there are industrial buyers that are willing to buy the product and who have done the technical due diligence. We don't want to invest in gigafactories. We want everything to be modular so that it's very light on capital needs, scalable quickly, and you can test and iterate the processes. You should never think about, like, oh, we need that kind of capital or concessionary capital or patient capital, because it's all bullshit justifying a business model that isn't working.
Erik, welcome to the show. Thank you for having me and for having us in Barcelona at the Norrsken House. Today, I'd love to dive into a few topics. I'd love to dive into how to commercialize science. I think it's not an easy task, right? I want to understand the key ingredients that makes success when you commercialize science. I want to learn more as well about your model. You invest in very few companies per year, but really, really support them. So I want to understand that as well. And then maybe hear your thought about the traditional VC model, as you are a bit different, and you also have actors within the Norrsken family, I guess, that are more traditional VCs. So I want to hear that story. That sounds good to you?
Super exciting. So happy to be here. Like 10 out of 10 of my favorite topics to talk about. So it's perfect.
Well, that's going to be a great conversation then. This episode is brought to you by Accelerating Impact, a non-profit that drives impact finance by running free accelerator program to support emerging impact managers. By joining them, you will get coaching, training, financial support, and access to a strong community of emerging managers. Sign up at the link in the description, and thank you to Accelerating Impact for supporting this episode. I guess I want to start with this. Why is it that most of the science is stuck in the lab? Why is it that it's difficult to get it out of the lab?
Well, building a company is really hard. And I think there's so many cultural differences between working in a lab and being a researcher or a scientist and building a company. And our society at large has this view that everyone can become Elon Musk and be like brilliant in engineering, brilliant in science, brilliant at company building, but he's one out of 8 billion people, right? And the entire venture model is also predicated on that assumption that every founder has to have all the aspects that it takes to be successful in order to be investable. And I think what we discovered in Norrsken Launcher is it's not like we sat top down and thought this out. It was more organically driven by our investments over a couple of years. But I think that the main difference is that if you're a scientist, you've been incentivized to get as many scientific publications as possible in the right journals 4 years down the line. That's what gives you status. That's what gives you the grants. That's what drive your recognition. Whereas if you're a company builder, you have to deliver results every week and you have to find the customers, and the customers will have requirements on the features that need to be built. And you have to work through really annoying partners who have demands and requirements that you think are stupid, but you still have to comply with and so on. And that's a very big mental difference. And so what we spend a lot of time on when we invest is understanding if the scientist has the ability to move into that direction or if we can work alongside them, because not everyone is able to do that. There's a fantastic organization in Oxford and Cambridge called Wilby, who ran a program. I think it's like this at least, and they have to correct me if I'm wrong, but they run a program where, let's say for the sake of argument, they take in 100 PhDs and help them become entrepreneurs. And at the end of the program, 20 of them want to become entrepreneurs. And we are for the 80, right? So we help the PhDs that realize that company building means recruiting and selling and setting up processes and all of that, which the majority don't want to do.
Mm.
And that's when where we come in. So with the Norrsken Launcher, just to set the context a little bit, is that we're company builders. We've in a team of 7 people. Between us, we've been first investor or built 15 unicorns. So we've seen like the early formative struggles and challenges that you have to go through in order to build a successful company. And the idea is that we take that experience and partner up with world-class scientists and help them realize the potential of their research.
What does it take to be a great entrepreneur?
Well, I'm not the the best person to answer. There's so many others who can answer this better than me. But I mean, you have to have grit. You have to have an ability to sell. You have to have a vision.
Mm.
Um, you have to be able to work both in the details and the vision layer. You have to be able to recruit, bring in customers. But the one thing is perseverance and grit.
Mm. And if you're not that type of profile, what's your way of solving for this? If you have just a scientist that's just an amazing scientist, can build amazing products.
Exactly. And right now, like the narrative in society is that everyone wants to become a company builder, and it's not for everyone. You know, so the background of Norrsken Launcher is that we at Norrsken we set up several VC funds, and the VC model by and large works in the same way across the world. You have a small investment team and you do 30 to 40 portfolio investments, which means that you can never get operationally involved in the cases because then you're spread too thinly across a portfolio. So the golden rule in VC is to always bet on the founder. And if the founder doesn't have what it takes, then you can't invest because that means that you have to get involved. Then some VCs will say that they're operationally involved, but it's really, they open the door or they sit on the board, but very rarely more than that. And this means that a lot of founders that come with really exceptional products get turned down because they don't have the ability to build a team or recruit or scale the company. And we saw this at Norrsken. In all our funds, there were so many, because we had this impact angle as well. There were so many people that came with incredible aspects or incredible products, but we had to turn them down because it didn't work for the VC fund model. And during COVID, we were approached by a team of company builders and professors and scientists from the University Hospital, Karolinska in Stockholm, who had an idea of how to. They basically had access to PCR machines. They tested the coronavirus, and they had an idea that we could scale this quickly. And it didn't work for the VC model, but we said that we will invest from our balance sheet at Norrsken, and that way we can justify being operationally involved.
Mm.
And then we did that and helped them recruit folks from Klarna. Our backgrounds are from Klarna, that could automate the lab, speed up the throughput, and thereby creating massive volume very quickly and much cheaper than other competitors. So this became one of the fastest growing businesses ever in Sweden. I think they did 200 million in revenues, 80 million in profits after a couple of years. So faster growth and lovable almost,
For sure.
And that showed us that we can actually work together with world-class scientists and help them with the other part, the company building. So it was not like a great idea or anything. It was just like, oh, here's a need, let's do this together. And then we tried the same thing again in stem cells with another professor, Katarina LeBlanc from Karolinska. And then we did the same thing again in small modular nuclear reactors. There's a professor at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm who um, designed a reactor that uses lead as coolant instead of water, which is the conventional method of cooling reactors. And then I went in as acting CEO and helped build the team and so on. And then after that, I decided that this is the most fun thing I can do. The foundation was best time of my life, but here's an opportunity to both think strategically about how to allocate capital and see where you can make the most impact, but then you also get to roll up your sleeves and get deeply operationally involved in the cases and build something new with a new model that complements the existing VC world. So I left 3 years ago and set up Launcher, which is focused on this.
How do you find great scientists slash how do you understand if the science is good? I mean, obviously,
Mm,
you don't necessarily have a scientific background. You've
yeah.
been mostly an operator, building companies or running companies at scale. It's sometimes tricky to get deep into the science and really understand what they're doing. And your role
Super
is
hard.
not really that, right? Like your role today is to help them build companies, but in the first place, you have to find the right
Yeah,
people,
which companies do you invest in? Right. It's
right?
a super good question. And I mean, so the first companies came organically, and then based on that, we sort of, oh, this is a model that works. Let's develop this into a fund. But how we think about it now is that when someone comes to us, we first have platform of scientific and industrial advisors that
Mm,
help us screen the company, and um, that will get you so far because if you have two professors in the same field, they're very subjective about which technology will work based on
mm,
what their career has been based on. So you'll get sort of a subjective view of, yeah, this is probably this could work, but obviously my technology is better. But it's still like, yeah, this could work or not. So you get some sort of level of understanding there first, and then also industrial advisors who help us understand if this is scalable or not. But that, as I said, will only get you that far. The thing that really matters to us is that there are industrial buyers that are willing to buy the product and who have that they've done the technical due diligence, and they've said that, okay, you've developed this new can, it looks great, but it's only interesting for us if you can produce 1 million of these cans, and you have one now. And then the founder of that basically like, okay, how do I go from 1 to 1 million? That's where we come in, because that's what we can help out with, like the commercialization, operations, scaling, building the team, and financing that. So we don't like to take technical or scientific
mm.
risk. We only want to take the commercial and market risk and focus on what we're good at. And if there is a big industrial buyer who knows this space and who've done due diligence and who are willing to buy the product, if we can just reach a certain scale, then for us, that's a great indication that there's low technical risk. But you can never be certain, of course. But that's how we approach it.
If we think about the venture model, you said you invest in 1 to 3 companies a year. So that's a lot of concentration of
Mm.
your portfolio for sure. You know, does that work?
Yeah. So this is I love this topic because the venture model has been built out and tested and works well, but not on average. I mean, the majority of VC funds actually perform worse
Hmm.
than the S&P 500, and you lock up capital. So it's, as an asset class in general, it sucks. It couldn't be worse than having something that is liquid and performs better, right?
Mm.
But it's a power law dynamic. So if you get into the best managers who are able to invest in the best companies, then it's a power law, and then that's what everyone said. All the LPs think that they will get into those assets, and then it works. But for the majority of the funds, it doesn't. And still, this model exists and prevails. Um, that model is, so let's say that you do 30 to 40 portfolio investments, you need 1 or 2 or 3 fund returners. So everything is like predicated on finding those kinds of moonshot bets, which means that even if a company can grow like 3x or 4 or 5x, it doesn't make sense because you own so little of the company that even if they're successful, it doesn't return the fund and it's not worth your time. I'm exaggerating, but that's sort of directionally true anyway. And our model, since we're much more concentrated, our portfolio only does 10, or our fund only does 10 investments in
Mm.
total. We have to have much higher ownership, which we do. So on average, when we invest, we have 20% of the company. And we justify that because we get so operationally involved. So it's much more than just capital.
And is it 20% plus resources allocated to the company?
No, so it's 20% ownership, and there's no like fees or anything other than that.
Of
So
course, but I mean, for the founder, basically what they get is 20% plus a part-time team that
yeah,
helps them.
exactly. And then it's more than a part-time team, and we're literally there side by side with them, helping build and recruit the team and culture, setting the processes, scaling the organization, getting commercial partnerships in place, and then helping with the fundraise. So it's really deeply operationally involved. And these are things that, it's almost all companies go through these
Mm.
needs, and very rarely have a scientist gone through that before. So we can really add a lot of value in that regard. And when you own 20% of a company, so let's say we invest 1 to 3 million in the first pre-seed round, and then we do our pro rata, and the company usually raises between 5 and 10. So if we do our pro rata, it's 1 to 2 million more. It's a very capital efficient way of owning 20% of great companies coming out of seed. And then the model actually work in the sense that we don't have to build these outlier companies. If you're an average VC fund of let's say 30 portfolio companies, 100 million AUM, then that means you can invest 80 because 20 is fees. Then you need like to get a fund returner, if you take into consideration that dilution, you need to that company needs to have an equity value of around 3 to 4 billion, which is really hard to get to.
Yeah.
Not that many unicorns in Europe, but there are some, of course. So for the top of the line funds, it works, but for the rest, it's hard. In our case, the equity value, since we own so much, can be much less for a fund returner. So it only has to be around between 600 and 800 million
Mm.
euros, which is a massive difference compared to the 3
Yeah.
to 4 billion. So with a more concentrated portfolio, higher ownership, the fund model is very different compared to the traditional VC model in that sense.
How many companies can fail in your portfolio?
Yeah, so we when we model this, I think it's around 3 to 4. But so far, so we've done 9 investments. All of them have graduated to next round. So 0% failure so far, and we think it's not going to be like that forever, of course. But we think that we lower the risk in each case by helping out with the stuff that we've seen. We have the scar tissue to prove. We've hit the mines before. We've been punched in the face. We've done all the mistakes you can. And by applying that knowledge to new cases, maybe we can increase the likelihood of success a little bit. So that means that we think that the failure rate is going to be lower than and so far it seems to be the case.
Interesting. So that means as a strategy, you could come in as a Series A player, just following Norrsken Launcher.
Exactly. And this is what's happening, actually. So if you look at the companies that are sort of graduating from us, they tend to get either the best Series A investors or industrial players. So it depends, because deep tech, there's lots of advantages of going with a strategic investor.
Of course.
So we see that both of those cases are happening.
What are the strategic advantages of having a deep tech strategic investor as part of your cap table?
It's hard to give general advice. Every situation is unique. But if you take one of our portfolio companies, Acteria, they started out by developing a molecule to reduce methane emissions from cows burping and farting, and now they've transitioned into a platform play of getting molecules with AI through the regulatory process, so that you can make agriculture sustainable. So it's any type of molecule, basically, and they've transitioned. But for them, getting AgriZero, which is a New Zealand-based strategic investor coming out of the agricultural companies as a CVC, basically, but they are a VC, as an investor, as a massive stamp of approval from the industry, because they are like they see every case in the world, and they decided that Acteria is the best opportunity for them to reduce methane emissions. And they have the network and contacts with like the big regulatory bodies, the big buyers, the supply chain players. So it's a massive advantage to be involved in that way. Of course, you have to be careful also, because it's not certain that Acteria will work with them long term. It might be that they go in other directions. So have to be mindful when you set up the shareholder agreement and so on, that they can't veto that kind of development. But in the case of AgriZero, they're an incredible partner to work with, and exactly the right type of investor. With the Blykalla, the small modular nuclear reactor, they just announced now a big partnership with Oklo. Oklo is Sam Altman's SMR in the US, one of the leading SMR players in the US, valued at 20 billion. And that kind of strategic partnership is not because they have the same technology in terms of cooling, but can really facilitate all the hard things about nuclear, which is related to supply chain and fuel and decommissioning and waste management and so on. And building up that infrastructure is critical for a company like Blykalla.
When you have a strategic partner, like an AgZero, for example, so big corporates has a lot of contact, could also be interested as a customer. Is that something that you want to see? Because I've seen recently, I was looking at quite a few deals recently where CVCs come in, but also as customer or as future customer, or like running a pilot or like doing something together. Is that something that you would like to see?
Yeah, so again, there's no one answer that covers this, because the world is not black and white, it's grayscales, and it can be massively advantageous, absolutely, and it can be a disadvantage too. When we invest, we want to be the only investor,
Okay.
because we put in so much operational work that we don't charge for.
Mm.
that if there would be other investors, we would work for free for them, basically. But which can be okay in some cases. If we co-invest, then it has to be someone who also adds a lot of value,
Mm.
and in that case, it would be probably a strategic investor who can open up the door or accelerate the rollout or
Mm.
whatever. They sign a big offtake agreement or something like that. And if you look at some of the more recent, if you look at Northvolt, for example, they would never have gotten to where they got to without the industrial partnerships they had with the car industry, particularly in Germany, like BMW and Volkswagen and so on. So that gave credibility to other financiers who then would sort of ride on the back. But without going into too much details on Northvolt, I think that was also part of later on why it became difficult for them and they eventually ended up in bankruptcy,
Mm.
was because of the way that those partnerships were structured. And then when the entire EV industry went down, um, it was hard to
Mm.
handle both the cap table and different dynamics between
Yeah.
those industrial partners. So there are massive advantages sometimes and disadvantages other
Yeah.
time.
It's kind of like if everything goes well, then it's an accelerator. But if
Exactly.
starts
And I
to,
think Peter Carlson was talking here at Norrsken yesterday, and he said that one of the learnings from him, I mean, the industrial partnerships were great, but when you think about the cap table and the pref stacks, that became, when things turned sour, it was pretty much a big reason why they
mm,
killed the company.
mm. If we go back to that first idea of commercializing
Mm,
science, getting science out of the lab and into the market, I'm curious to hear your take on when is science ready to be commercialized? What TRL do you look
yeah.
for? Like what's your judgment there?
Hmm. I would just take a step back first and put it in some context. I think what's so fascinating about Europe, which I don't think a lot of people know actually, is that Europe produces more scientific papers, more scientific output than China and the US.
Oh, really?
So there's more science, world-class science coming out of Europe than China and the US. But then when you take the next step, how much of that science becomes patents, then China is like so far ahead, and US so far ahead. And how much of those patents convert into successful companies? Then you basically have to use a microscope. Unfortunately, in Europe, like if you just look at S&P 500 type companies of the past 20 years, how many are Chinese? How many are American? How many
Mm.
are European? Unfortunately, very few are European. Um, so there's some, like, the trend is going exactly in the wrong direction for Europe and really in the right direction for the US. And so this is like an existential question for Europe. We have to turn this around because otherwise we're in area after area going to lose in productivity. And I think a lot of the times when policymakers and investors think about this, they just, we have to have more innovation, more scientific output. But that's not the case. It's turning that into viable businesses that scale. So that's a long and winding answer to just put
Yeah.
some context around the question. But if just to answer the question, we don't like we want to make sure that there are customers who are willing to buy the product.
Hmm.
So it's more driven by that than which TRL it is. Some of our cases have been TRL 4, others TRL 7. So there's a wide range there,
Mm.
and it depends on when our customer is willing to say, like, this is a product that we want to work with, and we want to buy as long as you can get to TRL 9 and scale this.
When we think about customers giving some signal that they would like to be customers, do you want to see a contract? What do you want to see?
Yeah, ideally a contract, but that very rarely happens. So then you have some sort of MOU or LOI,
Mm.
um, or co-investment, but some clear indication about the willingness to buy the product for sure, and that there's been significant time invested from the industrial player to validate the technology. Since again, we're not scientists ourselves, so we have to rely on others here.
Something else on this is like I think a lot of people saying that science and deep tech in general is really takes a long time to revenue.
Mm.
Um, is that your observation as well?
There are a lot of misconceptions about deep tech in general. It's more capital intense, it's longer to revenue. Yes, that can be the case, but also not the case.
Mm.
We've done an investment now in a company called Clear, um, which makes ventilation like 80 or 90% cheaper and much better by removing particles in a more effective way based on technology developed at Alfa Laval. It's fantastic. And Tommy, who's the founder, he was the head of R&D engineering at Alfa Laval. he spent like 20 years developing this technology, and then is using the same supply chain and factories for producing the units as Alfa Laval does. So it's like ready to scale immediately. So now it's just a matter of like, how quickly can we get go to
Mm.
market in place? How quickly can we build the sales organization? And they have already sold financing for it, so that there's like no capital need.
Mm-hmm.
It's no time to like it's just go go go. So that's gonna scale. I think his ambition is 20 to 30 million in revenue next year, and they started it this year. So it's like so there are cases like that. We have another company that in material science that has developed a way to use cellulose to replace plastic in a way that is 100% scalable and 100% biodegradable. And that's also just a matter of sales and like getting, because they've used existing infrastructure so that they can scale this endlessly, basically. But then you have something like Blykalla. I mean, it's going to take them several years to get the reactors in place. So there's again not one answer, but I don't think you have to be too worried about the fact that it's more capital intense and it will take longer time. It depends on the business model and the case. And when we invest, we don't want to invest in gigafactories. We want everything to be modular, so that it's very light on capital needs, scalable quickly, and you can test and iterate the processes.
Yeah, I think that's a story around first of a kind, which is quite interesting. It's like if you have modular parts, then yes, it might be a first of a kind, but you've de-risked so much versus like if you need like a big factory from the get-go, which is like a massive, then that's really a first of a kind case where like you don't really know until you have it.
Yeah, and you lose all the ability to learn along the ride. I mean, the learning curve or whatever it's called, it's so important for improving quality and
Mm,
reducing cost. And this has been the problem that has ailed nuclear, for example. For you build massive projects that are completely unique. Take Finland, for example. They put up a few reactors a few years ago. um, Dramatically over budget, super delayed. Everything had to be uniquely made. And then when they've done that, that competence just like poof, goes away. And then the UK is building another project, and that they have to retrain new engineers. And when they're done, it's just okay, done. Like there's no new projects, there's nothing, because everything is uniquely done there. And the whole idea with SMRs is that you can come down uh, in production time, cost dramatically by making them smaller, modular,
mm,
and producing them in factories. So the same theory that applies to cars is that you can start to
mm.
automate them and learn and improve quality and time to market dramatically.
Yeah, so I think that's maybe like a reframe that we need around what a first of a kind means, or is that really the good word to be using, right? That's sometimes.
Exactly. And that, of course, there are like deep tech stuff that you need to build big, massive. Like if you look at fusion, for example, it's going to cost a shitload of money to build fusion reactors, and you need to get the first one in place. But in general, if you can build stuff cheaper, I mean, this is an obvious thing to say. If you can build them smaller, faster, cheaper, it's better than big,
Yeah,
slow, and expensive.
yeah, for sure. Um, I think you have an interesting position where you can observe a lot of what's happening in the way we take science to market. I'm curious, do you see some patterns in terms of where that is failing? Like, where in the process are we failing to bring science to market?
I think one thing that fascinates me. Um, it's so stereotypical as a Swede to sit there and say like, oh, in Sweden we have a solution, but actually there's one thing that Sweden has done really well when it comes to commercializing science, that I don't think is there might be similar setup in Finland, but outside of that there isn't, which is that if you're if you work for Microsoft and you code something, then Microsoft owns the IP of that.
Hmm.
But the same is true for professors or PhDs. Like if you develop something in university in Oxford or Cambridge, the university owns 60% of the IP.
Hmm.
If you're in Denmark, like the university will own 30%, the institution will own 30%, and the researcher will own 30%. Which means that and then sometimes you have some sort of innovation system around that, an incubator at the university, they will take 20%. And before you've even started a company, the cap table is entirely fucked up. And the founder owns 20-30% or something like that. If that would be the case in a normal VC investment, everyone would just like walk away immediately, because
Mm.
you know how much work it is with that. And what you have in Sweden is something called läraren untaget, or the teacher's exemption, which means that the IP thing is that if you work for Microsoft owns the IP. But if you're a PhD or professor that teaches, then you own 100% of the IP.
Mm.
which changes everything. Because all of a sudden, the professor or PhD is incentivized to actually spend time on the company. If it's successful, there's a meaningful upside. As investors, we can come in and it's pretty fresh and clean cap table. So that dramatically changes um, how things are just the foundation of how the company is built. And cap table sounds so, it's such a VC thing to focus and think about. I didn't until I started investing. But when you've gone through a couple of iterations of companies and you realize how critical the cap table is, and you want only incentivize or aligned investors on the cap table where the founders or the scientists have the absolute majority and are in control of the company's fate long term. So that's one thing. Um, then I think another thing that unfortunately I think is throughout Europe is that, which we talked about in the beginning, when you move from academia into building a company, the cultural shift is dramatic. Completely different skill sets that you need, and the people that you're advised by are often people who've been, civil servants or part of the university ecosystem. Maybe here or there's some entrepreneurs, but typically it's like middle management from Ericsson or Saab, or like it's not people that have built companies
Mm.
themselves. And that is also such a unique skill set to have. So getting scientists in touch with like real company builders who've gone through the journeys is also something that we need to get much better at.
Mm.
And then funding in the US compared to Europe, there's a much higher willingness to just like throw money at everything. And the capital markets work so much better.
Yeah.
Capital markets in Europe suck compared to the US. It's such a weird thing that the the Swedish stock exchange IPOs more companies in volume than Germany, France, and the UK together. And Sweden has a population of 10 million people. It's like the size of the economy is like 1/10 of those three combined, or even smaller. And it's the only capital markets in Europe that works, basically. And the rest is completely regulated, or you're not allowed to do certain things, or pension funds can't invest in alternatives and so on. So this is like a major overhaul that is needed desperately. So I think those three things are probably, you know, um, making sure that the scientists own their IP, getting them in touch with people who actually know how to build
Mm.
companies, and getting the capital markets to work. Those three small things.
Very,
And
very
it's
small
good.
things.
It's not easy to change this.
Of course, yeah.
It's super hard, but it can be done.
Does that mean that you only invest in companies that are based or like created in Sweden?
No, we have a global mandate. We started out in Sweden just because it's easier here. It's easier to sit and work with a person that you
Yeah.
can, sit across the table. But we just did a new investment in the UK, so we're gradually taking that step. But
How do you manage the university topic there? Because I think it's quite a big topic for a lot of investors, which is like if a company has 60% of the AP from the get-go,
yeah,
it's quite difficult to work
yeah,
with.
we wouldn't invest in that. So there has to be some sort of solution, or people have to agree that the cap table will be, reconstructed. That's a big issue, and one of the reasons why we've started out in Sweden and like slowly scaling to the like very opportunistically choose the right companies outside of Sweden. And since we only invest in 1 to 3 companies, we can be very selective. And there are cases where you find clean cap tables and you find exceptional people and where we can add value. But there's not an endless amount of them.
Yeah. What's a clean cap table?
I mean, a clean cap table is that the owners own 100%, or the founders own 100%. And when we invest, we take 20%. So after our pre-seed, it's like 80%, 20%. But then what often happens is they have a few angels that join as well in that round, and maybe there are several founders. So it gets, slightly different, but that's like directionally the setup that we're looking for.
Interesting. When we think about financing these companies, so you
Mm,
said the capital market are completely broken, or at least they're not working as efficiently as in the US.
mm.
Um, do we need also maybe a mix of capital sources?
No, um, I don't think so. I think if you build a company that has so whenever you start to say things like that, it's like you pander with the or with the founders, and they're not good enough, so we need some other source of capital. But then they're never going to succeed anyway. If you build a company where it's very clear that they're going to be profitable long term, and there's a very clear trajectory, then they will get funding. That's not a problem. Most of the European tech companies were founded by American VC funds, and they will come. Like Klarna IPO'd a few weeks ago. I think 80%, something like that, at least that size, are American investors. And they found that company. And it happened. What's really exciting to see is that gradually the European ecosystem is catching up.
Mm.
My favorite example is Sana Labs, which was just acquired by Workday for 1.2 billion. Sana was founded Klarna was founded 20 years ago. Almost only American investors. Sana was founded 10 years ago, almost only European investors. So that exit, it's an all cash exit, will return around $1 billion euros to the European ecosystem, to European investors that will then recycle that into Euro. And all of them have money, so that's what are they going to do? They'll invest more.
Yeah.
And there's a very clear that's slowly happening, that change. So you get more and more European investors, but you should never think about like, oh, we need that kind of capital or concessionary capital or patient capital, because it's all bullshit justifying a business model that isn't working. You know, if a business model is working and it will be profitable, then it will get capital. And when Norrsken was set up, before, and it's not just because of Norrsken, but at that time, there was a lot of talk about social entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And social entrepreneurship at the time had the exact same discussions. We need different kinds of capital because we can't have business models and so on. But it was because people had big hearts, but no business experience or business knowledge. And the idea with Norrsken was that you can actually do both. You can do impact and build great companies. And then you get scalability and resources to scale your solutions. And the same thing is true for science. If you start to if you apply different measures for financial success and so on with scientists, then they're not going to get capital long term. Like, the only way to get funded and to get resources long term is to build successful businesses, and they will get funding. Like it's never been easier to fund your company than it is today.
I like that take that you have on the situation, because I think a lot of people would argue the opposite, that we need more different type of capital. The climate tech is different than the other one.
Yeah, it's Cambridge Analytics they had a presentation yesterday where they showed like what are the returns of climate related investments and PE investments in general over the course of the last 20 years. And climate investments, the problem for climate investments is that like Northvolt went bankrupt and pulled down the entire return. So the median or the average return was like negative in the past 2 or 3 years for climate tech. And that's the problem. It's not that there isn't capital, but the problem is that you're not returning capital to your investors in a risk-adjusted way. So
Which is also the case, I guess, for other categories. I mean, we are saying that for climate tech, but I haven't seen. I mean, the other markets, like the SaaS markets and everything, like they are also not performing as well as in the past. I mean, you haven't seen that many APOs. They're coming back, right? Like Klarna, Figma, and a few others.
Yeah.
But like, it's not like it used to be 10 years ago when everybody
No,
was just
it's coming back now. I mean, you had what's the company's name now?
Canva as well, I think, no? Or
Yeah, no,
Canva.
I'm thinking of an IPO in Stockholm. Just it was like the biggest IPO in this year, which was very short. So like a security.
Yeah.
So and I can't remember the number, but it was like 20 billion IPO or 30 billion IPO. So like, it's really happening now. Capital is coming back, and the thing is that past 2 or 3 years you couldn't make any money off your investments, and then like that's the problem. But now IPOs are coming back, and DPIs are gonna start flowing back to the LP community as well.
One thing we didn't talk about so much during this discussion so far is your role as your former role as a CEO of the Norrsken Foundation. Um, is there any learnings, like specific learnings from that experience? Of course, you have learnings, but like, are there key takeaways from that experience on the European ecosystem, innovation ecosystem? I mean,
Yeah, so just to for people who don't know Norrsken, so Niklas and I worked at Klarna. Niklas was the co-founder of Klarna, and I was part of the management team for a period of time, and then set up the business in the US. And he had this idea that maybe we can use the experience from fast-growing tech businesses to solve meaningful or environmental problems, and asked me if I wanted to join as CEO, and then we built it together. And then our hypothesis was just like, uh, let's bring in business thinking and startup thinking into the impact world. Because historically, I had been very driven by organizations like the UNDP or social entrepreneurs, which didn't scale well, and it just became black holes that where you needed donations, and donations were drying up, or they always dry up eventually. So the whole idea was just let's because we didn't. It was an entirely new world, so we approached it very naively and very humbly, like, let's try things and see what works. And
What did that come from, this idea of like going into the impact world? I mean,
yeah, so the the original story was that Niklas had, just as all of us, like when we're young, we think about building status and wanting to get rich because that will solve all our problems and we will feel love from everyone. And he got that to that stage at a very young age, and felt nothing. All the expectations he had had about what it would mean to be rich after founding Klarna, it meant nothing. So he decided that I want to do something more meaningful and find meaning in that. And that was the idea of Norrsken. So it's all because of him, and that, the shock that it meant to him, that I'm not happy. Why am I not happy? I have money. And then the entire like societal narrative, which is based on this, didn't apply to him. And then when we started to build this, it was lots of trial and error because it was a new area for us. So we tried to build companies in house first. We wanted to reduce. The first companies that we worked with was like trying to reduce corruption in Western Africa. So we worked with Investigative Journalistic Network in Ghana, and we tried to use lots of the tools and methods from therapy, and digitize that and spread it to everyone and build companies out of that ourselves. And it failed desperately. And we realized like it costs money and it takes a lot of time and it's high likelihood of failure. But we can take the same amount of money and invest in 10 companies and help them or support them. And then, maybe one or two of those 10 at least succeed. And then that way you'll have more impact than just like betting on one or two yourself. And so there's really a realization that maybe we can, instead of just trying to think to, in hindsight, it sounds so stupid, but we can't do this ourselves. Let's see if we can get the ecosystem and the community to help us find the right solutions and just build the ecosystem and platform for support around that. And instead of trying to top down dictate what questions were important, just see bottom up what was successful, where they could combine both a business model and impact. So that was how Norrsken morphed. And then we needed an office. We found an office, but it was 100 times bigger than what we needed, which became Norrsken House in Stockholm. And then we were like, we've done a few investments, but we don't have that much capital. Maybe others will invest alongside us. So we went out to start to talk to institutions. Everyone said we were batshit crazy, that this is never going to work. We had some entrepreneurial friends who had gone through journeys that have been very successful and wanted to support us. We were super thankful, and without the support of like Carl Manne, who founded Mojang, and Sebastian Knutsson, who founded King, and Philip de Sander, who founded Daniel Wellington, they put in money into our first fund. And then based on that, we raised the second fund, which was then institutional capital. So Sam Invest in Sweden and EIF came in, and that sort of changed the level of skill set when it came to investing. And like, okay, we can actually do this. And we were also able to bring in fantastic people who had been investing for their entire career and wanted to do something more meaningful. So all of Norrsken grew organically in that way, and we're like, we'll try different things and we'll see what works out. And now it's like, Norrsken VC is super professional, and they're top tier impact fund in the world. And so that was one thing. And then the other was that one thing that frustrated us a lot was that if you talk to people coming out of university, like, who are your role models in life? Everyone would say, like, it's Kim Kardashian or it's this movie star, and they are great people. But if you want to drive societal change, you you want to change this narrative in society of what gives status
Mm.
and what kind of achievements you celebrate. So I always had this as when I was the CEO. I always had, like, I'm only going to be successful at Norrsken if one day we reach a point where Norman Borlaug is as celebrated as Kim Kardashian, because no one knows who Norman Borlaug is. He's the man who he got the Nobel Prize in 1970 together with Carter for developing a new breed of wheat that he started to do that in 1942 in Mexico, saved like a few million people from starvation, then took that wheat. I mean, he basically combined Western wheat with Japanese wheat. So you had bigger chunks of wheat and they were shorter, so they could survive more harsh conditions and be more productive. That has basically saved a billion people from starvation, and no one knows who he is.
Yeah.
And he should be the most celebrated person on the planet. He got the Nobel Prize, so obviously there was some sort of recognition, but
But only within an ecosystem which is already driven by science.
exactly. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how can we position Norrsken to be a spotlight on the fantastic entrepreneurs that exist out there and make them the real heroes of today. And by doing that, getting more people coming out of technical universities or business universities to want to start companies in that field, rather than what was celebrated the most then, Klarna and Spotify, which are great companies but not really meaningful, impactful companies. And so we, a long story short, we organically sort of tested different things and ended up in this investment space. And then we needed a place to work from. That became Norrsken House, which we then started to expand to different places. And we wanted to change the narrative in society and put the spotlight on people that we think were the people that should be celebrated. Because people, since we're born, it's so funny when you get, I don't know if you have kids, but when you get kids, it's, you see, like, they imitate, like, from the second they have eyes, they're like, okay, I'm gonna look at you, dad, now, or my brother here, or my sister, and what they're doing, and you start to imitate people that you look up to. And we think that stops after you're a child, but it's 100% the same when you're an adult. Like, Elon Musk, I want to be like him, and
Yeah.
then that becomes the narrative of what success looks like in society, or whoever you look up to. So so thinking about status and who we celebrate is very important.
It's funny because it's part of the reason why I started this podcast is that so far, I think in the VC and startup world, the people that are very much celebrated are the SaaS and B2B guys, people, right? And I mean,
Mm.
no offense for them, amazing companies are being built. But for example, if you look at Anton from Lovable, is on the news everywhere right now. Great, is growing a fast company.
Mm.
But I would love to see a company in the climate space that gets as much
Mm.
celebration as they get, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have to, stop bitching and just get to work and
Yeah,
build successful companies. When Northvolt was, at the peak, I think they were in the media just as much as
yeah,
Lovable is now. So it's all about, like, who are successful in company building, and really
indeed.
me. And I mean, I would argue that Elon Musk is. Um, we all have our sides of, that we can all get better in certain dimensions, but he has had an impact on the planet like no one else with SpaceX and Tesla and so on. Um, so I think that it's also easy to, like, separate funds and say, like, this is good for site and this isn't. But I think if you look at Sequoia and Andreessen Horowitz and Khosla and Index and Accel, they've all done investments that have
Yeah,
been really
yeah,
important. And I think there are some funds, if you look at, Pale Blue Dot or 50 Years, that are very specifically impact oriented. They're getting massive amounts of recognition,
yeah,
which is super well deserved. I think
for
they're
sure.
amazing. So I don't think it's like that black and white. And I think that the world is much better off thanks to Sequoia, and
Yeah.
even though they invest in some B2B SaaS.
Not saying it's not good. It's more like I wish there was more recognition and more presence for the impact climate people in
Yeah,
the room.
but I think there is, but of course there can always be more. But the only thing we can do is, like, build successful
Yeah,
businesses with narratives that are exciting and fun, and
yeah,
then people will start to pay attention to it.
of
And
course.
that was the thing with Norrsken as well, that Impact historically had all, here's a big report, our sustainability report that no one reads, and we started to think that maybe we can do things that have, with cognitive dissonance, morning raves, or very like black and white, uh, stuff that resonated in a different way. And is this a foundation? Like, how can they communicate? Like, there are no report. What, you have a morning rave instead? Like, it's just that kind of stuff needs to happen as well in order to make it interesting.
Yeah. I guess we're getting towards the end of this conversation, but one of the last thing I would like to explore is you said earlier that it wasn't quite easy for you even to set up the Norrsken Foundation, to raise the fund and everything. Um, it's funny because from the outside, people would think, okay, they were super successful entrepreneurs. They snapped their fingers, and all of a sudden, money was flowing, and they had the funds. That's not the story, is it?
It's always the case, right? Success from the outside looks like it happens overnight, but when you're in the inside, and this is true for every startup. I mean, we've seen so many from the inside, and from the outside, it looks like it's just a rocket ship and it's so easy, but it never is. Obviously, we had a lot of luck. We were riding a macro trend that was very clear. We were surfing a macro trend, but there's so much hard work, and I think that the thing that makes me the most proud about Norrsken is the team that we were able to get together. And these are people that could have gone and worked anywhere. And they were so smart and so driven and motivated. And I mean, when I'm walking around here in Barcelona, you can see that the same culture is in place here as we built in Stockholm. And the amount of talent that we have is just extraordinary. And when you assemble a great group of people together, good things happen.
Yeah.
So that's what I spent most time doing. And Sarah and Funda, who've taken over as CEOs now after me, Funda was the first recruitment I made, and she's been with the foundation ever since. And that is what the success of the organization is.
Yeah.
And that really matters. And from the outside, if it looks like it was easy or not, I don't really care that much. The thing that really matters is that the team that we have and the culture and the thing that they can do together. Because I know like nothing is impossible to them.
Yeah. No, and I love that. We will end on the positive note.
Everything here has been positive.
Indeed. Well, look. So if people don't want to reach out after this interview, where can they find you?
Yeah, just Erik@launcher.vc.
Easy.
I read everything and respond to everything. So just reach out. We invest, we help out. I'm happy to make intros. So just ping me.
Sounds good. And then one last question for you: who should be in your seat next for an interview, for talking about climate and investing?
I mean, I think you've had Hampus Jakobsson from Payblue,
Yes.
right? Yeah, they are absolutely insanely good. But I think one fund that we're super inspired by is 50 VC based in San Francisco. They have a similar approach, very entrepreneurial, very driven, like help PhDs become company builders, and they've done some amazing stuff. I think getting Ella or Seth would be great. But I think also you should, follow the money. Talk to, Uli Grabenwater, EIF.
Yeah.
He's in charge of impact and VC funds investing. He's super smart and he sees everything. So if there's one person who you can talk to and get like an overview of what's happening in the space and ecosystem, he would be a great choice.
Well, thank you so much for today. Listeners, before we drop, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or to give us a follow and a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Erik, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. 5 stars. Let's go.